So what is a back pocket sermon and why do you need one? That's coming up right now on Preaching Donkey. Preaching Donkey is all about helping preachers communicate better. In fact, we want to help you preach with more impact and effectiveness than you've ever preached with before. So let's dig into today's topic. The back pocket sermon is that sermon that you have just in case you're called on to preach when you weren't expecting to. This could be something that happens at your church where you're not scheduled to preach, but the person who is scheduled to preach gets sick last minute and you've got to step in. Or it could be that you're maybe at a friend's church and they ask you, hey, would you want to preach? And you get like an hour's notice. There could be any number of reasons why you would need a back pocket sermon. If you're a preacher, it's just a good idea to have one. So I want to give you some tips for your back pocket sermon. Number one, your back pocket sermon should be something that you're pretty familiar with. Maybe it's something that you've preached before. For me, my back pocket sermon is a sermon that I've preached multiple times to different audiences, one way or another. It's not always the exact same sermon, but the sermon itself, and particularly the passage, is very familiar to me, so I could basically pick it up and I could preach it at any point. So just make sure that your back pocket sermon is something that you know well enough that you could very easily look over your notes and preach the sermon. That brings us to number two, and that is make sure to store your back pocket sermon in a way that you can easily access. You don't want to have a situation where you have to go searching for it and you don't remember where you put it. So I store my back pocket sermon in a few ways. The first way is I actually just email myself the Word document that my notes are on. This is because I want to always have the full set of notes, the way that I preach from them, accessible to me at any point. Now, I don't actually look at my notes when I preach typically, but if we're talking about a back pocket sermon that I didn't have time to really prepare for that week, I may have to look at them more. So I want my full set of notes. I email those to myself just in case I'm in a situation where I'll be able to print those notes before I preach. If I can't print the notes, then I also have a backup version to my Evernote that's formatted to look at my phone and scroll through and be able to see the sermon in that way. I've also saved the notes to my phone in a way that's downloaded to my phone in a dock. That way, in a rare case where I don't have internet access, which is definitely rare these days, but just in case that happens, I've got that contingency. So as long as I have my phone, I've got my sermon. So I would suggest make sure that your back pocket sermon is accessible to you in a lot of different ways. Tip number three. Once you use your back pocket sermon, you're going to want to put something else in that place. You don't want to be in a situation where you preach your back pocket sermon, and then a couple of months later, you have to preach it again. You don't want to be in that situation. So make sure that you always kind of have one that you could go to if you needed to. So just to review, make sure that your back pocket sermon is one that you're very familiar with. Make sure that you've stored it in a way that you can access it very easily. And number three, once you've used it, make sure that you replace it with something else so that you always have a back pocket sermon. So I want to hear from you in the comments. What are some techniques, what are some ways that you handle emergency preaching? Do you have a back pocket sermon? If so, what is it? I just want to get some comments going where we can share and learn from each other about how to deal with contingency sermons, contingency preaching. So that's it for today. My name is Lane. Again, you can follow us at Preaching Donkey on Twitter, preachingdonkey.com, and also facebook.com/preachingdonkey. We're all about helping you preach with more effectiveness and more influence than you've ever preached with before. We'll see you next time.